So thank you so much, Poppy, for talking with Love Oz YA about your latest release, Road Tripping with Pearl Nash, your third book, which means that you're an absolute veteran by now. Normally I'd open with, what was the genesis of the story, but given that you're now very much an old hand at this, what do you think was, or what have you found was different between releasing your first and even, I guess, your second and your third books?
Wow. So I guess for me, I think the biggest difference is realistically when I first started before my debut came out, I really just wrote that for myself.
Mhm.
And you always have, I guess, hopes that something might happen in the future and maybe you'll get in the door and it'll get published. But I think that seems so kind of, I don't know, like wishy-washy. It wasn't really on my mind when I was writing the actual story. So it was very much just writing a book for myself, I
Mhm.
think. And when I kind of sat down to write my second book, it was interesting how much suddenly I started thinking about audience and readers and how I think it just like kind of, I don't know, I guess it sort of froze me and I couldn't really write exactly what I wanted because I kept thinking, oh, someone might not like this, or what if they think it's cheesy or silly? And I think that was like this huge thing I really had to get over in remembering that I kind of do have to write for myself first because I've got to love the book, I think, for myself to enjoy writing it for a
Mm.
start. But I kind of think that readers are going to know if you're writing something that isn't really what you're wanting to explore or is coming out of your heart in that way. So I think that was probably a huge lesson for me. And it's something that I probably still struggle with a little bit, like even when it came to writing my third book, which is Road Tripping with Pearl Nash, just that kind of push and pull between what you think people might want and what you want to do, which I think is kind of really silly anyway, because obviously you're never going to know what people actually want and
Mm.
you're never going to be able to please everyone anyway. So that's why I think it is so important, or I feel it's so important to write for myself because, yeah, you're never going to please everyone anyway. So you may as well please yourself and have, a really good experience writing the book.
That's a really interesting journey to actually go on. And I think I came across this quote by Isabel Carmody a few years ago, and I'm going to butcher it, so forgive me. Forgive me, Isabel. But she was saying like you need to like if you're not enjoying what's going on the page, how can you possibly expect the reader to? And it was like it's one of those things where like whenever I'm writing a scene and I'm kind of like, oh, I'm plodding through it. I'm like, okay, we'll just skip it. Skip like make a time jump, put in a time jump, move to another scene. If you're bored, say what you need to say, or can this information be imparted in a different scene as like, oh, remember that conversation we had in which we talked about this. And it's actually a really great tip because you suddenly go, well, I'm not enjoying this scene. Let's
Yeah.
go.
I heard this very similar advice, and I
Mm-hmm.
feel again for me, it was pretty much exactly what you said. It was quite, I think, like really changed, like it changed my,
Mm.
I guess, the way I was engaging with my fiction. But I can't remember who said it, which is terrible. But I heard it on a podcast, and she was talking about the idea that there's a lot of elements in stories that are popular for everyone. These are
Mm.
the kind of stories that I guess have this really mass appeal. They're like ingredients that people love. And I think some of the stuff she was saying is, like danger and romance and like glitz and glamour or gossip, these kind of things that humans like. But then there's the idea that each person is going to have their own personal list of, things that you personally love, like in stories. And her advice was to kind of figure out what they are, write them down, and when you are kind of working on a scene or a manuscript that isn't working for you and you've got that kind of block where you're not enjoying what you do, you think about how you can twist it by maybe adding one of those things in. And I think her example was really cool. It was just the idea of like, if you've got to write some characters to get from A to B, and it's a boring scene for you, but the conversation say needs to happen to further the
Mm.
plot. And she was saying she really loves atmosphere and rainstorms and things like that. So she was like, well, why don't you just write it with a different background to then make it more you know, I guess interesting for you, like, or challenging or fun or something. I thought it was great advice. And I think that was actually something I heard when I was working on my second book, Taking Down Evelyn Tate. And I was really like, I really hit a wall with that book, kind of around what I was talking about before with this. Was so silly, but just this idea of reader expectations, even though I didn't have any readers at that point because my first book hadn't come out yet, but I was still so like just thinking about it. And I remember that advice just really changed how I kind of approached the whole manuscript, and it got me over like a major hump. So yeah, I think it's really good advice.
Yeah, it is really good advice. And I feel it is really hard because like the second that you have a readership, you also acknowledge that you owe those readers something. Like it's a hard balance because you're fundamentally the author, it's your story. And you also, you by virtue of being the author, you're God. It's a piece of funny. It's one of the things that I'm studying at the moment. Like the question about the death of the author and the author as God, and like, should we do that? Should we not? So I've been thinking about it a lot. But as the author, you are God. You know more about the story and you know more about the characters than the readers. And especially if you want to revisit that material, you might be doing something for a very valid reason. But your readers enable you to keep writing. And the second you have a readership, you go, well, as much as the story is fundamentally mine, I also have an obligation and, to be fair, an economic incentive to make sure that what I'm giving people is something that is respectful of why they've come to read my books in the first place. So it's such a hard balancing act. Like there are two characters in my first book, and everyone or a lot of people are like, oh, I'm really looking forward to them getting together. And I'm like, I'm so sorry, but it's never going to happen. But as I was editing the second one, and I was all these reviews were coming in, and people were like, oh, I'm really looking forward to what's going to happen in the future. I was like, should I? And fortunately, I kind of came to my senses, like, no, that's like for a number of reasons, no. But it's a balancing act, and it's about like respecting the fact that your readership are, have an investment in the characters and the worlds that you build once it's out there in the world, I guess.
Gosh, I think that's so true. I feel like that's something that, yeah, I feel like it's a topic that I think about a lot, and something that I think I keep coming back to as, as I work through writing more manuscripts and more books and trying to think of what I want to do long term and what I'm interested in long term. And I think it's such a hard thing because over the years, for instance, like I feel like when you're reading books, the way that you engage with them changes, your taste changes, the things that you want to explore changes. But you're so right, like once you have a few books out, if you're lucky, you have, you end up gaining a readership, which is the most incredible thing in the world. And to then change tack is, that's a scary thing to do. It's like starting all over from scratch. And yeah, it's really something that I've been thinking a lot about, and I think kind of always have, because when I first started writing, I always wrote YA. That was what I really loved. But realistically, even though Making Friends with Alice Dyson was my debut published book, it was not the first manuscript I'd written. And I think it might have been, by the time it got published, I think it was my fifth that I'd written, but I'd already written like two more after that. So like I'd written a lot, and they were all completely different genres. It's just that Making Friends with Alice Dyson happened to sort of, I think, get me through the door. And so after it was published, I was like, oh, well, exactly that. I'm gaining a readership for this type of story. So I want to write more that's similar to hopefully appeal to the same readers. And, it's obviously, it's a genre within YA, that kind of rom-com genre that I really love. So it's not like it's a chore for me to write it. It's really fun. But there is that push and pull of, what is kind of a smart decision for your future career if you want to do this for a long time. And, if you love it, of course you want to do it. Like you want that opportunity. So you're trying to be smart, I think, around your decisions, but also very much what you said about, I guess, needing to put boundaries up there and follow what it is that you really care about as well. And I think it's such a push and pull. And I don't know, I don't think I've fully figured it out yet.